We all heard stuff like this before every single movie that we saw. God forbid if they don't make a movie where you can hear a Hollywood logo before it starts. And today I want to show you how I wrote this. This is an original, but it's based on a tutorial that I saw from one of the best composers that I know, who's called Daniel Babum, who's also a friend of mine. But anyway, what I wanted to do in this video is to attempt what Daniel showed in his tutorial, and I decided to make it by using one library only called Imperia Nucleus, which is a library that gives you access to the whole collection of orchestral instruments you need to write orchestral music. So you have full ensemble patches, there's also like split section like violins, etc. But you also have like very interestingly pre-orchestrated ensembles, which are useful too. And all the patches come in both classical and modern mix, so you can use them for quiet stuff as well as like very loud trader stuff. The cool thing about this library is that it works with Kontakt Player, so you don't need the full version of Kontakt to use it. It's just, if you get that, you can write all the orchestral music you want. And I wanted to test it and give it a spin to see if it really is very good. And I have to say, after writing this, I'm like very convinced. The only thing I didn't like in this library is the percussion, which I didn't use in this track because of that reason. But anyway, let's go over this track because I want to show you how it was done. The first thing I did, obviously, was to sketch it out on piano in the most simple way. So chords and melody. One thing you might have noticed is that in some parts it slows down, and that's because I wanted to create the like a Hollywood vibe of like film music. So the tempo goes down and down, especially here it goes very low. So that's one thing you can do. The melody, is like this motion that goes down and then goes up, and then it goes up by one octave, and then it ends on a super high note. That's the classical Hollywood logo melody. As for the chord progression, it's nothing too crazy. I think I just did some cool inversions, so it's pretty much for the most part. Sometimes there's some changes here, but like the chord's quite, I think, simple. The orchestration sounds cool though because it's diversified on many different instruments. We have as a first thing some parts of that chord progression being played by the string ensemble patches and nucleus. So this sounds like this because I also drew these automation curves for the dynamics on the MIDI out that I'm using, so PRS articulate. And also the cool thing in the chord progression is that despite the fact it's quite simple, you have these independent motions and movements here, and stuff like that in between phrases. So that's one thing you may want to do to create a cinematic vibe. Then I have some double basses patch doing the same thing to enforce the bass, especially here. Then I have this staccato arpeggio. So this is heavily based on the chord progression, although it's not necessarily playing the same exact notes as the chord progression. Like some of the notes in each phrase of this staccato do belong to the chord progression. So what I did, or what I like to do when I want to write like spiccatos that are spicy like that, is I use ghost notes. So I sketch everything in the same pattern. I go here on the helpers and activate ghost channels. This shows me all the notes that I'm using on all the other instruments that I'm using in the pattern. So many of these notes, see like this F and this C sharp, they belong to the chord progression in this part. This G sharp does not belong to the chord progression, but that's not a problem. But anyway, what I like to do is like use mostly the notes that are being triggered by the chords in that specific part, and then maybe like add something else, like these notes here don't belong to chord progression and stuff. So it's based on chord progression, but it's not necessarily following it. Then we have the melody. Now the melody, as the first thing, I played it on first violin patch. As always, making a melody go up by one octave is gonna make it sound more intense and stuff. So that's why I did this leap here, because in the second half I want it to be even more epic. And yeah, it's like this motion that goes higher and higher and ends up with this tremolo note here. I am enforcing that melody by adding it on a lower octave as well as that high octave on a string ensemble patch. It sounds like this. And then at the end, I have some color brought by this phrase here. This could sound way better if I split it in 2 different patches, or maybe 3, and those 3 patches had legato. But, you know, given the grandiose sound of this orchestration, I don't need to be so, I think, detailed and stuff to make stuff sound realistic. This is what the strings altogether sound like. That's pretty okay. Let's check out the brass. For the brass, I'm doing some chords on the brass ensemble because I was lazy. This must be mostly French horns and bass trombones and tubas. As you see, it's not as, like, this chord progression is not as cluttered as the string chord progression was, because when you're playing with brass, you need to be careful. Then I also have this sort of like chords, I would say, on trumpets. And here they end, because in the second half, I'm actually using the trumpets for the main melody. So as for the main melody, there's 3 voices I'm using. Okay, I'm gonna show them all. So there's one, like French horn in the brass ensemble. And that's one voice. As you saw, it kind of follows the main melody, but in certain parts it does not. It does whatever it wants. But in doing whatever it wants, it still follows the main harmony or the main chord progression. And if you want to learn more about how to write counter melodies like this, I have a tutorial called How to Write Great Melodies and Counter Melodies by Ear. Check that one out. Then in the second half, I have this other voice. So that's mostly like French horns and trumpets, and then there's a higher one. Super high. And that's for the melodic brass. So when you put all the brass together, now, this would obviously sound much better, again, if I split it on different patches and use legatos instead of using sustain on brass ensembles. But again, I was kind of lazy and I was just sketching it with ensemble patches. And then I was like, it sounds good anyhow, so I'm going to keep it like that. No, there's no need to go deep and use detailed patches. It would sound even better if here I added like a crescendo articulation at the end. I'm not sure Nucleus has that though, so I would have to use other libraries maybe for that. Then for the woodwinds, I have the same thing going on, like 3 voices, I think. One voice is doing this. So like the bass notes from whatever we saw before. There's another voice that does this. Those notes are called trios. It's when you oscillate between 2 very close notes in a very fast way. And I have more of that on a higher end of these woodwind voices. So the idea with the woodwinds was to double my melodies that I have on the French horn and everything else, and also add the trills to give movement to certain parts that would sound kind of still otherwise. And then I have some choir, which is kind of harmonizing and doing melodies and harmonies. It's the same thing everywhere, kind of. One thing you can notice everywhere is that in this second half, I really take everything and like put loads of notes in that. So I did it on the choir, in the woodwinds, in the brass, everything. In the second half, you really feel an upheaval of emotion. And then I also have this glockenspiel, which is layered to the string staccato I showed you before. It's very quiet though. Here I'm automating the expression and not the dynamics, because the dynamics are not responsive in percussive instruments like this. But in all the instruments you saw, there was like dynamics automation everywhere. If I didn't have that, it wouldn't sound as realistic. So Glockenspiel serves as a way to like make that string spiccato a bit more snappy. So that's cool. And yeah, altogether sounds like the way I showed you. Then I also added some percussion, which are not from Nucleus this time, which I didn't show you in the preview because my computer lags a lot when it plays the percussion. But what's going on in the PercS that I wrote is this. So with the PercS, you just open up the track a lot, and if I play them, it's gonna destroy my PC. To be honest though, the percussive part is the one where I put the least effort, and also, you know, I need to buy some better percussive libraries to get something that sounds as mind-blowing as Nucleus does in Orchestras. The only thing I don't like about Nucleus is, again, the percussive part, but I think getting percussion right is very hard for a sample developer. Like, there are separate libraries just for that, for a reason. So the last tip I have for you, which is another tip I took from Daniel, and again, check out Daniel Babon's video. I'm gonna leave it down below in the description because it's just amazing. Another thing Daniel taught me is that you need to use OTT on your master, because if I don't, this is what it sounds like. This is with OTT. Like when you use OTT, okay, maybe the sound is not necessarily natural anymore, but honestly, it makes your track sound so much more amazing. What I do is I set it to either 15% depth or 20% depth, and then I go here and I increase the low by 5%, high by 5%, and mid I reduce by, you know, maybe 10%, 5%. Depends on how I'm feeling. But this is going to affect your sound. And basically this helps because with orchestras, you tend to have a overlap of frequencies in the mid-range, and that makes your track kind of muddy and less clear. So if you reduce it like this, it's going to make it sound better. But if you reduce it with like OTT, that's more gentle. I don't know why it sounds better. It's just awesome. So try it. And then I have Azotopozon on the master too, to beefen up the sound. And that's how this was made. If you want to learn more, actually, I have some tutorials on this channel, like there must be hundreds, and there's a playlist called Orchestral Music 0 to Hero that I made. Look for it on YouTube, you're gonna find it. There's all the fundamental tutorials you need to check out to learn how to write orchestral music. But if you want to feel followed in your process of learning orchestral music and you want to start from zero and become like incredible composer and stuff, one resource I recommend you a lot, which helped me personally back in the day when I was learning all this stuff, is the Evidence Cinematic Music course, which is an insane packed of information course that is going to help you into figuring all of this out. But if you don't want to invest any money in that, you can keep on watching tutorials on this channel. So it's up to you. Link for everything is going to be in the description, and I hope you learned something. Leave me a comment to let me know if you like this video, and I'll see you in the next one.